Forget everything you think you know about working in the shop, because today I've got something that'll... No, wait. Scratch that. Don't forget everything. That could be dangerous. Let's start over. I've got a story for you. Intrigue and adventure, of betrayal and redemption, of love and... It all starts with this very suspicious dustpan. And by suspicious, I mean not suspicious. I know, hard to tell just looking at it, but I made this thing a very long time ago. 10 years ago, maybe even 15. Sure, the handle's all crushed now and it's all dinged up. But when it was new, it worked great. I'd venture to say better than great. Though, to this day, I still have no idea what on earth drove me to make my own dustpan and not just buy one. But, other than probably the half a day and $20 in materials it cost me to make, I don't regret a thing. Recently, I've noticed my garage hasn't been the tidiest. Frankly, it's a downright filthy mess. Now, at first, I thought it was the 15 simultaneous projects I have going on, or the fact that I don't clean up after myself. But then, one particularly drunk Friday night, it dawned on me. My moment of clarity. My dustpan must be worn out and just not panning as well as it used to. Think of it this way, I've probably gone through 10 brooms since I made this thing, but never a new dustpan. It's simple math. According to my YouTube analytics, most of you might not remember this, but there was a time, and I'm not trying to be that guy, there was a time maybe 20 years ago or so when there was no internet. Well, a little bit of internet maybe, but it was for squares. Back then, there used to be these stores filled with books. If memory serves, they called them bookstores. Sure, there are still bookstores today, but they're not really bookstores like they used to be. They're more like cafeterias with really good waiting rooms. The bookstores I'm talking about, you couldn't eat in. And drinking in one? Barbaric. If you wanted to drink something and read at the same time, you'd have to go to a 7-Eleven. And even there, you only had time to check the centerfold before they realized you were underage and kicked you out. In these bookstores, I'd usually gravitate to the same section. Well, after I checked if they had anything new in the fine art chapters of the photography books. You know who you are. I'd always end up in the science and technology section. I say section, but it was really just 2 shelves near the floor, if you were lucky. And no matter which bookstore you went to, it was always the same 4 or 5 books. There was always How to Wire a House Without Burning It Down. Superbly illustrated, of course. I mean, cover-to-cover hand-drawn screwdrivers and green terminals and cross-sections of living room walls. So it was that book. Then there was like the pipe fitter's handbook or something that was 1,000 pages and $200. Who walks in off the street to buy the pipe fitter's handbook? Oh, and how could I forget? There was always one of those Richard Finch books on how to weld airplane fuselages with a gas torch in your garage. Chapter 1 was how to weld basically an ashtray for the butts of your used stick electrodes. Chapter 2 was building a roll-around welding bench. And Chapter 3 was the garage airplanes. Darn, I loved those books. I must own 4 editions of it. But every now and again, you'd get lucky and run across a book by Ron Covell. Now, I appreciate some of you might not be familiar with that name. Ron Covell holds a special place in the metalworking mythos. He's like the patron saint of lost hammers. Ron is a level 99 hammer-forming sheet metal wizard. And I was about to put this on upside down. His books and videotapes show you how to make giant pasta strainers, comedy-sized cigars, slugs to trick the pinball machines, avant-garde coat hangers, the craziest stuff with nothing but a flat piece of sheet metal and a hammer. Until I discovered his books, I really thought you needed a 100-ton industrial press and very expensive tooling to make giant belt buckles. I'd thumb through his books with my jaw on the floor. Full disclosure, and my apologies to Ron, I never actually bought one of his books. But in my defense, what he was doing just seemed impossible and way outside what I would ever be capable of doing. which, fun fact, is what impossible means. Anyway, short story long, imagine my surprise when I discovered not only was Ron here with us on YouTube, but he also watches this channel. We got to chatting and, just as you might expect, we decided to build dustpans together. Just have a look at what he sent me. Is this thing gorgeous or what? You might not see it just yet. You may need some context. He crafted this out of raw flat sheet metal, one hammer blow at a time. He hasn't released part 3 yet of his build series. There might be some welding involved. It's hard to tell. I guess we'll find out together. But just look at this thing. As soon as I got this, grinning from ear to ear, I skipped across the room to the phone and gave him a call. I said, Ron, really love the pan. Work of art. And don't mean to sound ungrateful, but you forgot the handle part. He walked me through it. Turns out I'm making the handle part. I was so embarrassed. So here we are. You're caught up to speed. I'm making 2 handles, one for him and one for me. Let's get to work, shall we? The standard go-to in a situation like this is a good old piece of broomstick with a nail in it, right? And since this is Hollywood and all, maybe I'd get a little fancy with an electrical tape kung fu grip. But would you believe my luck? All my broomsticks aren't even sticks. They're cheap vinyl covered tubes. I'd stand here and tell you I had a million other ideas for a dustpan handle, but I just kept coming back to some sort of Bowie style knife handle. This is me winging it. I like to start with something of an underlay I can CAD over. I know someone's going to ask, this is Sketchbook. It's my favorite free drawing software, though it is from Autodesk, so you know. Just kidding. This used to cost money, $100 thereabout, but they give it away for free now. I really should make some time to call them and say thanks. Now we're in SolidWorks, which isn't free. What's up with that, SolidWorks? I've already modeled in a rough approximation of Ron's dustpan so as to have some context. And speaking of context, let's drop in that handle sketch. Scale and rotate it to something that looks about right. Next bit I'm going to fly through. It's a matter of getting that sketch into 3D so we have something to feed the CNC machine. Everyone's got their own way of doing this. And what you're seeing is a mishmash of 2 or 3 refinements, trying to get the surfaces right. Though in CAD, it's always hard to tell what's right. I did go in a couple of times and plump the surfaces up a bit, so the end product hopefully would be more handily. Be comfortable to hold and look right on the dustpan. And I settled on this, 4 parts. The handle core, some wood scales, and a mounting flange. I should add, at this point, a more rational person might perhaps print this out and bandsaw it out of some scrap wood. Or heck, maybe 3D print it. Sort of test fit it before committing to a lot of work. But I just jumped into CAM. This is just the handle core, but all the parts were exactly the same. I created a block, that thing you see in transparent. That would be my rough stock. That's what I'm going to carve that part out of. Then each part got 2 jobs or setups, one for each side, to rough out the bulk, clean up the flat areas, and then 3D cam the more complicated ends. Once happy with those cam toolpaths, I exported them to a thumb drive. Before we can do anything with this though, we need to prep the stock we just saw in CAD. The dimensions of which are very important. Well, sort of important. Fine, the thickness is important, since we'll be flipping this stock to get to both sides of the part. Bear with me just one moment. Oops, sorry about that. All right, that's better. You'll notice I made 2 of these since I need 2 handles. Now I used my ball peen instead of the cross peen because I also needed 2 locating features. These 2 reamed holes. These make sure I can keep track of the 3D part that's stuck inside here when I flip this over. My origin for the cam work will be the center of these holes. That way it doesn't matter how long or wide these blocks are, but it still matters how thick they are. If they're not right on with each other, or more importantly with the CAD, then my finished part could come out thicker or thinner than intended. You know, I think that came out pretty all right. The two sides appear to have matched up pretty good. There's a little extra material around the perimeter. Let's give me something to hand finish. I want this to be a complete round from one side to the other. Yeah, maybe a tiny bit of mismatch, but I can live with that. I think the real miracle here, though, is not having cut into my fixture plate. And just like that, all the parts are done. CNC is amazing, isn't it? Just turn the machine on and off it goes. Pretty much happens all by itself. There's the actual handle, the core, I guess, the spine, whatever it's called. I also cut 2 scales. They'd fit as you'd expect. These parts all still need finishing. That's what we'll be doing next. But I'm happy with how these turned out. And no, these aren't painted. That's their natural color. That's woad. Wood? I'm not sure how you pronounce that. This variant happens to be cherry. Cherry as in the type, not as in quality. Though they are pretty cherry if I do say so myself. Machined these just like I did the spine. Clamped down the piece and let the mill go to town. Only difference is these are one-sided, so they're easier. I sort of planed the back down a bit so it's nice and flat. But the machine is cutting these almost down to final size. I used cherry as that is the traditional fruit wood for dustpans. You know, like hammers, you'd usually use ash or hickory or something, because they're the most hammery woods. The most dustpan-y is cherry. And finally, of course, we have the cross guard. This will be the mounting flange that fits to the pan. I already gave this part a shot of sandpaper, which is an excellent segue to finishing. Although pretty cool as far as CNC goes, these are rather roughly finished. And that was by design. I mean, there are usually always tool marks to be removed, depending on the look you're going for, function of the part. But this is a step removed from that. In programming these, I opted for a coarser step over, in exchange for the hand finishing I'll have to do now. As you see them here, these parts took, about half hour per side on the handle, so maybe an hour machine time there. The MAHO isn't a race car. Maybe 20 minutes each side of the scales, mostly because I started with some thicker stock and had to work my way down. And about the same for the mounting plate, maybe a little more, 30, 40 minutes. This is 2-sided, so I had to flip the stock and work from the back too. All told, on paper, maybe 2 or 3 hours of machining time. Practically speaking though, that took about 2 days. By the time you get everything set up, break a few tools, clean up between setups, walk the dog, have some coffee, look for step clamps, look for bolts, get everything aligned. It turned into 2 days, but I'm getting off topic. If we have a close look at the handle, though all parts were done the same, I have about a 40 thou step over, about 1 millimeter. That's on a 1/4 inch ball nose end mill. And I didn't let the tool path come all the way down to the side. That's mostly because of the way I was holding this. Had I gone to a finer step over and wrapped that tool path all the way around to actually finish the part, not to mention having to position this part 4 times to be able to machine it from 4 independent sides, this part would likely now be done. Require very little finishing. However, the machining time would have been through the roof, probably 5 hours per side. I'm making that number up, but it'd be a lot. Since I design these parts and have full artistic and legal control over how they look, I figured I'd just get the mill to do the brunt of the work and I bring it home with a file. Being aluminum, it's not that big of a deal. We just have to be careful. So now, the next step, I want to get all these parts to go from this finish that we saw up close just a minute ago to this finish. Okay, well maybe just a touch better than that. Frankly, there's not a lot to this process. It's all about paying attention to what your file or sandpaper or whatever is doing and course correcting between each stroke based on what you see. Again, I have the advantage of having designed the part, so I already went through and am familiar with building the surfaces in CAD. I know where the curves are, or where they should be, where they should start and end, and where the clean break lines need to land. Had this been someone else's part, I'd likely be using things like calipers, maybe radius gauges to massage the part to the right shape and size. First step though is to establish the basic shape. I'm using a flat file, mostly the corner of it, and a round file, the corner of that one too. I'm removing the support material that held the part in the milling setup and cleaning up each facet or face, paying really close attention to the surface breaks, where one face meets the next. I want to keep those sharp lines. They're very important to the look. If for some reason I accidentally file those off, well, I'd have to step back and maybe reevaluate just how important they really are, or were. But for now, anyway, I'd like them to stay important. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, I am so afraid to touch this thing. I forgot just how much of a scratch magnet polished aluminum is. I had it to a mirror finish, installed the scales, and gave it a wipe down with what I thought was my cleanest microfiber cloth. And now this thing looks like it's been in a bar fight. Ron, I don't know if you're watching, but when you get this, be careful, okay? Don't get it near any dirt or dust or anything. The rest of this story is pretty standard fare, so I'm going to rush through it to make my deadline. After all the filing was done, on the aluminum I tucked in with some sandpaper. Started at 200 something and slowly made my way up. 400, 600, etc. With each step being just careful to remove all of the scratches from the previous step. So you're not done with the 600 until you see all the 400 grooves gone. Now, you might find this hard to believe, but I made it all the way to 1,000. Just to put that in perspective for you, I only packed up to 800 for my honeymoon. But after 400 or so, I stopped and started to bring in the scales. Same story here, just laid them in the handle and brought them in with a file. The CNC was very close, of course, but I left a little extra material and I had to clean up the tool marks. Ditto for the crossguard, except here I had to stop and add some tapped holes. I emailed Ron yesterday, asked him what he preferred. He said his absolute favorites are 832s. These holes are what we'll use to attach our dustpan bodies. Finally, and probably the scariest step, welding the crossguard to the handle. And that's it, I think. Lots of buffing and polishing. Some of the sharp corners on the wood scales chipped out. I should have seen that coming. Those got pretty thin. But, you know, adds character or something. I could do a bit more work, clean it up a bit more. Some of the end grain in this cherry has gotten dark. But, well, you know what it's like when it comes to making dustpan handles. You're just never really done, are you? It is a weird fit if you try to hold it like a knife handle. Not exactly sure how you'd hold on to this thing. But in use, I'm sure any normal person would just pick this up by the end, like a dustpan. At any rate, I think that's all I've got for you. If you want to see it installed, head on over to Ron's channel for the grand finale. But before he can do that, I've got to get this to him ASAP. And in this case, I don't think traditional shipping will do. All right, let's see if this drone still works. Thanks for watching.